3. The Muster of Raja Berani. Never had Berani garnered better rest than he did that night, the dreamless and sudden unconsciousness of the deep drunkard, with none of the fitful waking or morning sickness which would generally accompany such a sleep. His father had packed for him while he was away, and spared him having to worry over the particulars on arriving home. He had crashed careless onto his mat and lost awareness without worry or nerve. But it would not be right to say he saw nothing in his sleep. He felt there was some element of the Diri in it, for his mind was awash with the music of waves breaking on a distant shore, and the soft magenta gleam of a sunrise he could not see. When his uniformed, teal-clad father did awaken him, the house still in shadow and the sky beyond the spined roof only just beginning to show the blue hues of a coming morning, he felt as if he had lain in slumber for 9 or 10 hours, and rose easy to his feet. He clad himself in the blue silks his father had set out for him, and shouldered his heavy pack to follow his father downstairs. The man was meticulously clad as if for battle, save the mask meant to accompany his turban, with his decorations of valor softly clinking on his chest, boots thumping on the stairs, and the silver hilt of the ancient serpentine carrice blade of the House of Suburan, fitted for use as a bayonet, glinting in its ivory sheath along the small of his back. His balato, a heavy machete-like sword with a hilt in the form of a lion's head, was scabbarded at his left hip. A pistol, one of the sleek new magazine-fed models from Vesipalabuhan, at his right. His rifle was slung secure and close on his shoulder. Berani felt naked next to his father in his silks, but he supposed there was nothing to be done about that until he was issued his own kit. As they came into the entry hall, Berani found it was not empty, for his mother was waiting for them. "You look so good when you wear the silks," she told him, wrapping him firm in her arms. "It only took you going a world away to get you into them." She was far more stalwart this morning than she had seemed the night prior, which relieved Berani. Much as he appreciated her care, he did not wish to see her that way again. When at last they broke apart, she held up a linen wrap dyed a deep teal, embroidered with a number of subtle raised stitches of the same color, handing it gingerly over to him. It was a light, breathable scarf, meant to shroud the face. He recognized it at once. He had almost forgotten. "Your Reconnecting," she told him. "I started stitching it last year, when your father was called away. Wear it always, while you're far from here. It will keep you safe." Berani tucked the thing tenderly into the foremost pouch on his leather bag, assuring her, "I will." "And don't trust anyone in Vesipalabuhan," she told him. "You know how people are there. Awful sorts, especially the women." Berani did not, in fact, know how people were there, but he answered, "I won't." "And you have your paper, to write?" "He does," Raja Berani told her. "I packed it for him. Even if they take it in training, the priesthoods will render more if he asks." She nodded, exhaling. "Be careful then," she told him. The tears were beginning to come, but her voice did not break. "And listen to your father." "I think I get flogged if I don't do that," Berani replied. "Insubordination and all." And she laughed as she took him in her arms again. Berani murmured the professions of love a son is ever too timid to say to a mother, and she held him all the tighter. Berani stood a respectful distance back, not looking, and allowing them the time to say their final goodbyes. When Berani was freed, he turned for the front doors and crossed quick to them, not wishing his father to see the tears in his eyes. But his father stopped to hold his wife, and share the same tender parting with her, and Berani gave the Raja the same respectful distance he'd been afforded, drying his eyes and stealthily gathering his breath. Then they walked together from the house, the Raja halting in the front court to don his own homespun Reconnecting, completing his uniform, and hiding his face from sight beneath the eyes. They walked down the long stair of Suburan Citadel and out onto the docks, where a third outrigger was waiting for them. It was Satria, husband to Yanyi. He too was uniformed and equipped, though far less nobly than the Raja, and bound to their road. Berani liked what he'd seen of Satria well enough, but the man was of a Pajuang Marga from Lake Ungu, and he had not had much exposure to him since Yanyi had left the citadel. Satria had made an impression on Raja Bayani during exercises in Gunug when Berani was just 14, and he trusted his father would not have accepted the man's bid to marry his daughter if he wasn't impressed with him. But the man was 18 years Berani's senior, and he had showed little interest in the Kerja craft, as he called it, that Berani spent his days with. Berani was glad, to some extent, that Satria would almost certainly be given a much higher rank in whatever expedition was organized, and thus have little to do with him. "You've said your goodbyes?" Raja Bayani asked him as they settled into the outrigger, and Satria pushed off. "Yes," Satria told him. "Yanyi plans to come over and stay with the others while I'm gone. She'll be coming out this evening." "Bulan will be pleased," Raja Bayani said. That was the sole interaction the trio had on that silent trip from the Needle Forest out to the Kotawan dock. They passed several lakemen starting their days early out on the water, but the town was, for the most part, still silent. They walked the dirt paths east to the edge of town. The overflow stream of Dadu was a trickle now, but the slick rocks of its way poured there down a sharp series of small waterfalls, winding their way off into the thickly forested decline down to Ungu and the other lakes beyond. Raja Bayani at their lead, they traced the cobbles of the lake path as it stepped and sloped down the mountainside and into the dark of the thick jungle for which the sixth lake was famed. Lake Ungu, the Violet Lake, was about a mile out and 1,000 feet down from Kotawan, shrouded from view by the tangled yakal and figs until they were nearly upon it. In the deeps of its forests, the last lights of night were casting their purple gleam in the darkest of its shadows. The lake itself was a shrouded place, so deep within its crater of the mountain that the walls blocked out most morning or evening sun. The waters were nearly as broad as Dadu's, but aside from a single deep span beneath the descending waterfall flow, the muddy floor was never much more than 100 feet down. Mangroves dominated its surface, masking the murk of its waters from what little light did slip down to Ungu's depths, and beneath them were scattered many sodden islands of tangled growth and croaking frogs. They wound down to its banks, and then shifted out onto the rickety bamboo bridges from isle to isle, which formed the lake's central causeway. At the middle of the swampy mass, perched atop the largest of these islands, they entered the town of Kotalele. Here dwelled 1,000 crowded souls, larger than Little Kotawan, but still small even by the modest standards of Tujuhdanau. By the time they reached Kotalele's center, the sun was well and truly risen somewhere up above, even if that wasn't fully evident to Berani, unaccustomed as he was to the darkness of Ungu. The claustrophobic streets of the little settlement were more active, and gathered in the center of town were around 70 men of varying ages, lined up alongside the rutted road. The minority of older men in the group were clad already in marine uniform, as Raja Bayani was. Satria's 3 elder brothers were among these. The rest were a scattering of 20-somethings. Raja Bayani led his trio from Lake Dadu into the rough formation, making a column of 2 abreast, ordering Bayani to the back with the youngest, and leading Satria up to be among the foremost rows, taking point of the small contingent himself. Then, having spent only a scant few minutes in Kotalele, Bayani picked up his quick stride once more, and the men of Ungu and Dadu followed in his wake. Berani found himself in the rearmost row, next to Pahala, a young man his age he knew from monthly drill down at the lowest lake, the son of Satria's eldest and most officious brother. But Pahala had never rubbed Berani the same way the others of that clan had, and he was glad when the man started talking, softly so as not to alert the men up front, to ease the monotony of the informal march. "Both old enough this time, eh?" "Finally," Berani said in turn. "Did you get to eat, or was it just my father that swept me out without breakfast?" "No, you're not alone," Pahala grumbled. "Don't think any of us got anything. My father shouted Mother down for trying. There's no chance they make us stomp all the way down to Puchat without, right?" "Don't know," Berani said. "But we must be stopping there for a final muster. So even if we've got to haul all the way down on an empty stomach, we'll definitely get fed overnight." "Laut save me," Pahala hissed. The hike down to Lake Jeruk was nearly 2 winding miles over rough inclines and steep-stepped pathways, and the scuffed stone of the walkway grew more maintained with the descent. The trickling stream which traced their way led them in time out under the full light of morning, and into the bountiful orange groves which blanket the Fifth Lake's shores. Jeruk was only 2 miles across, its islands of sunny orange lilies drifting the water in the slow breeze, and the column made good time along the shady shore path towards the town of Kotajeruk on its southern shore. Of the 2,000 souls, 80 were mustered. Raja Bayani wordlessly sorted them into the marching order before again moving the growing formation along its way downward. 2 other 20-year-olds familiar to Berani and Pahala took up the row behind them as the column wound out of the Jeruk crater. Marak and Dimas, both boys of different clans, inseparable at monthly drill. And as Berani and Pahala continued their talk, still mostly centered around food, they would rope the other 2 into it. "You, Jeruks," Pahala said. "Either of you get fed this morning, by chance?" "No," Marak said. "Made us stand out all morning waiting. And Dimas's uncle said we'd be beaten if we asked." As soon as the column was well and truly on the serpent descent in the thick of the surrounding trees, obscuring their position at the rear from view by the elder soldiery at the front of the formation, Marak was hard at work lighting a cigarette with a match from his pocket. Widespread as smoking had become in the Isles during the last century, this was seen as a Sholo-Shaishan habit by most Lautani, even if the Shaishans tended to the pipe rather than the paper as the delivery mechanism. The instructors at monthly drill were, to say the least, not fond of seeing it. "You're going to get beaten with or without asking for food if you keep that up," Dimas warned him. It was one of the few times Berani had heard the small, quiet Dimas speak in all the years they'd been aware of one another. His talk was always to Marak, or else in answer to an instructor. "Well, I'd rather kill my hunger and get beaten than stay hungry and go unbeaten," Marak replied. "It's a long walk down to Puchat." Before they'd gone halfway to the next lake, Dimas was smoking too. The closest thing to a true city the province of Tujuhdanau boasted was Kotabut, which sprawled across both the twin lakes, Biru and Kuning, the blue and yellow lakes. The pair of them were so close in elevation that, if not for the thin strip of stream-gnawed stony ridge that separated the two, the lakes would appear to be one great body of water. Even then, taken all together, they were scarce the breadth of Dadu, and the pinch of the ridges and cliffs and towering yakal about them added to the teeming bustle the place exuded. Kotabut, a city of near 40,000, was built out over the water on stilted platforms, with only its largest clan homes or temples set upon the shore. Great tilapia farms and swinging moats were cut into the sun-baked wood and bamboo of its countless causeways and platforms, and by the time Raja Bayani's column came down into its valley and out onto the walkways of the city, noon was fast approaching, and all the storefronts and houses were abuzz with the life of day's height. Here they gathered 600. The men of Kotabut had been formed up in a great market square near the boundary where the twin lakes met, and many of their wives or sisters or friends of Kerja or Pedagang blood had come out to watch them go. The Pejuang men of the third and fourth lakes joined the column with a bit more jostling and confusion of place than the others had, not just because of the sheer number of them, but because now many of the older men, serving the officerial roles they would be officially sorted to in final muster, were placed scattered along a rough third line running to the side of the column, with a man placed every 10 rows or so along the formation to keep an eye on their lessers in the center and rear. Gadin and Jorok, 2 cousins from the Kuning section of Kotabut, were placed in the row before Marak and Dimas, a couple up from Berani. They were, as had always been the case at drill, already bickering when they got into the order. "Fuck a tilapia, man," Jorok was saying, his head forward and his stride unbroken. "You're trying to tell me you'd take a tilapia over a catfish?" "Catfish are nasty," Gadin said. "They live in mud, brother. Their whole diet is shit and trash. They eat dirt." "So?" Jorok spat. "That's what plants do, I guess." "You smell cigarettes?" Gadin was asking, snapping out of the conversation. "We allowed to smoke back here?" Marak was beginning to say something, but some Kotabut man in his 30s or 40s from the third line was on them before it could get any further. "Mouths shut," he told them. "You keep walking until the Raja stops the column, or I'll stop the column and rip the skin off your back. No smoke, no talk." And so it was the rest of the way down to Lake Mera, the third line occasionally intervening up the way to shout down someone who'd made noise beyond the soft tramp of massed sandal and boot. The Red Lake's flowers had become almost pink beneath the dry season's coming sun, and afternoon found 100 Pejuang recruits awaiting them in Kotadara, a town renowned for its old blood feuds and duels between the Margas of its warrior caste, the fodder of many a folk song or tall tale on the lakes. Jabat and Darmang, another pair familiar to the others, were sorted into form behind Berani and Pahala, but by that point, the grim gazes of the third line's future officers made it evident no more greeting or banter would be tolerated. The final leg between lakes took over an hour. By the time they arrived on the banks of the fortress lake of Puchat, it was drawing towards evening. The tropic sun would set before long, and the shadows were growing deep with the cast of late afternoon. Kotambak, a settlement of just under 10,000 pressed up against the centuries-old wall securing the eastern pass down from the lowest lake, had a muster of only 150 or so, with that lowest lake, despite its history as a fortress for Tujuhdanau, boasting relatively few Pejuang clans. But it was there, once the men of Puchat were sorted, that Raja Bayani stood before them in the town center upon one of the wall's many stairways, and addressed the gathered Pejuang men openly and properly for the first time. For many of them, given the rarity of the Raja himself speaking at monthly drill, this was the first time they were hearing the voice of the man who ruled the province. But to Berani's ears, the gravity of the tone the man took was, despite its cold authority, a thing of comfort after a hungry day on the road down. "We, as men of Tujuhdanau, were alerted to the circumstances of our duumvirate late," he began, without pretense or grand gesture. "But I will not allow us to use this as an excuse to delay our arrival in the capital. We will march from here through the gates of our home and straight down for the Four Forks, on through the night. While generally you would be moved by boat from there, I will not accept the delays this would bring about either. There will be a train waiting for us at the station in Parampatawa. It is 30 miles to the platform, and come dawn, I expect you to be boarding that train." There was a great deal of muted shuffling and subtle groaning at this. "You will be given 1/2 hour here in Kotambak to eat," Raja Bayani went on. "You can see the veranda of the temple there. That's where your portion of rice and fish can be got. 1 serving each, no lingering. Any slowing up the lines will be flogged. Your minders will be watching. Sit where you will and with who you like, but stay in the town center, and do not disturb the locals. There's been a trench dug in the jungle along the lakeshore as a makeshift latrine, and I would advise you take this time to use it, unless you want to have to do it down on the low road, and then sprint to reclaim your place afterward. I will call you back to formation, exactly as you are now, when the time comes. You will keep your order, or your minders will correct it." He gazed out over them a moment, watching as each of the exhausted men of the formation eyed up the distance to the temple, every one seeming to weigh the possibility they could get there in the first minutes. "Dismissed," Berani called. There was a rush, but the men were not foolish enough to make it chaotic. They moved in 5 separate lines through to 5 separate stations, where a number of temple initiates of Gazurgu dished out a bland lump of sticky steamed rice and boiled tilapia in flimsy wicker bowls. But even if the food was less than appetizing, the portions were generous, and even Berani, still riding out the last of his prior night's glut, ate every bit of it. He knew he would regret it by the long night's end if he didn't. Within 10 minutes, he and everyone else in his section of the column had eaten. Many of the men were slipping off into the band of dense forest out past the temple to relieve themselves, and Berani took the opportunity as well. Who knew how many breaks in the march to come there would be? Some among the Pajuang men made a big fuss of this, accustomed to the privacy of a warrior caste compound and a family privy, Jorok and Godin the most vocal among them. But Berani imagined shitting in a ditch in the trees beside Puchat was gentle compared to what was in store for them. The column was milling about half reformed by 20 minutes in, no one wishing to be caught last to get in order when the call came. Pahala was stretching his shoulders and craning his head in anticipation of having to sling his pack back on. Marak and Dimas were sharing the last 2 of the cigarettes they'd brought down from Lake Jarok, and given the minders had not bothered to call them out for it during the rest, enjoying them. Godin and Jorok argued with one another, and the generally passive Darmang, who had for reasons beyond Berani's notice become somehow embroiled himself, about whether there were brothels in Besipalabuhan. Jabat was asking Berani roundabout questions on whether he could somehow sway Raja Bayani into offering him a position as a corporal, or some other lower officer. But they were joined in their part of the confused crowd by a familiar, tall, gangly, bespectacled man of their own age who was actually clad in a proper uniform. He had no weapon, but his turban was in place, and his heavy pack was government-issued. "Samudra," Berani said, going over to him, gladly taking an excuse to slip away from Jabat's pleas. "I haven't seen you in years. I figured you got some sort of pass not to drill. You always struggled with the running. And now here you are, all dressed up in official kit. Where have you been?" "Bad lungs," Samudra said, "but not bad enough for that. I got shipped off to Besipalabuhan at 18 for medical training with the Temple of the Sea. Just got back 2 weeks ago." He pointed proudly at the blue and teal symbol on his shoulder, an azure sun rising over a tropic sea. "Good timing," Pahala said from nearby. "You talk up any priestesses up there?" "Well, I'm still alive," Samudra said. "So no." They were interrupted as a small gaggle of men wheeled towards them through the crowd, young 20-somethings darting to slip out of their way as they came. Berani soon saw why. His father led the group, and all of the others comprising it were older men, 40 years or more by the hints of gray about their faces. Raja Bayani was speaking, his gaze focused entirely on the uniformed man beside him, saying, "You're still absolutely sure you want to forgo a proper commission, Agama?" "Yes," Agama replied, emphatic. There was no sir or lordly respect attached to the words. "You know I'd just mess it up. You have more than enough candidates to fill the spots without me. I'll be better off down low." "All right," Raja Bayani said. "You've more than earned the right to choose. Don't hesitate to tell me if your mind changes before we reach the Iron Harbor." "Will do," Agama told him. Again, the unabashed casualness of the address jolted Berani. But his father was not offended, and throwing a subtle nod to his son, the Raja turned to depart for the head of the column. Agama settled into place among them. He was uniformed, decorated, just as Berani's father. He had a pronounced scar along the graying coat of his left cheek. Like Berani, Agama was broad and short, outdone in height by many of the younger Pejuang men around him. He went into his bag and removed his own pack of Besipalabuhan-made cigarettes. "Anyone want one?" Gadin and Jorak, their verbal spat over whores derailed by the new arrival, were fast to take two. Agama lit his own after theirs, and stood silent watching the city around them until the whistle sounded. The men in the line put themselves in order, grumbled or muttered whatever final words they needed to one another before silence was imposed, stowed any cigarettes or water which had come out during the lull, and were soon on the march again. Out through the old Puchat gate and down the river's way they went. The jungle was thick about them, and though true night was an hour or so off, the trees were already alive with the white glints and gleams of Puchat's own luminescent life. As they descended the cobbles and rock-carved stairs of the eastward way, and the sky grew red with dusk through the canopy overhead, they saw that the whites of those luminescent plants and bugs gave way to the turquoise hues common across the rest of Jalawa. It was the first time Berani had ever set foot beyond the Puchat gate, and the dying away of that last gasp of the magic of Tujuhdanau seemed to drive home the realization for him. For all his life, he'd daydreamed of making that walk down to the Four Forks, and laying eyes on all which was said to await beyond, and now, faced with the reality of it, the innermost part of him revolted at the thought. But he was still, despite his nerves and doubts, excited on some level, and let that intrigue and yearning for new things drown out his desperation to run back out of the dark towards the gate they'd left long behind them. Lanterns came out among the minders in the third line after sunset, but the conditions were still shadowy and close in all that forest. Drinking was done on the move, and the men's only allotted talk was the arrangement of passing canteens or clinking bottles between them when one marcher's reserve had run dry. The column averaged 3 miles an hour at the pace Raja Bayani had them walking, and it was a pace that took a heavy toll on those who seldom rucked or ran outside of monthly drill on Lake Puchat. Any passively fit Lautani man could hold such a pace for an hour or two, of course, even in hilly terrain, but with 30 or 40 or 50 pounds on one's back, and with a days-long exhaustion already behind many in the lines, some of the less able among the youngest began to lag and stumble. Berani, tired but still fully alert and steady, took it on himself to help keep these stragglers apace with the column, a fine distraction from his own thought and worry. Agama, too, was instrumental in keeping the rear ranks in line. Berani had been helping tow a wheezing Samudra along with him, arm in arm like a couple out for a stroll as he lent his forward momentum to the taller man, when he had to dip out of the lines to empty his bladder around midnight, 6 hours into their march. Agama had come forward to take his place, and when a breathless Berani had made the jog back up through the darkness in pursuit of the fading lantern light, Agama had waved him back into position. As hour gave way to hour, occasionally a man would stumble and fall, or twist an ankle on a steep step, but the agility and flexibility famed in the Lautani held true, and none of these were so seriously hurt they could not soon after fall back into order and continue on their way. They passed the electric lights of the lonely telegraph station and reached the meeting of the Four Forks which formed the Great Snake River, around 3 on the morning of the 1st of Metzli, if Agama's battered pocket watch was to be believed, and then wound north up the river towards Padang Sisir for about half an hour. There they came to a great aging bridge of sturdy old stones and crossed to the east bank, from where they marched back south to the forks proper and continued east along the path to Parampatawa. The glow of electric lights lit the sky purple in the distance above the center of that aging city. It was the first time many of the younger men had seen such a thing, and even having come from a place so prone to nocturnal lights in the wilderland as Tujuhdanau, the sheer scale and concentration of the glow through the trees was a novel thing. But they did not wind into the core of town. The particular station to which the Raja was leading them was on the very outskirts, a blinding beacon in the darkness along the riverbank. The train itself was not yet arrived. The men sat in worn silence all along and about the platform, seated on packs and smoking or drinking in a haze of total exhaustion, until 6, when a great engine from the capital rolled up to take them. It was a monster to Berani, a boy raised on stories of the nation's mighty living warships. The steam and ear-raking noise it made was all that he had ever imagined the terrible roars of Lautani dreadnoughts to be in battle on the seas. But he heard Agama assure a shaken Dimas that the thing was not alive, and at length, after a long wait for the ponderous thing to be turned back around to face eastward, the men of Tujuhdanau were sorted into its many cars. The eldest took the furnished compartments closest to the engine, while the youngest were relegated to the rear, where the cars had no seats, and the men were forced to sprawl out on the wooden floors to be jostled around like cattle. But given the vast majority of the 20-somethings in these cars had no frame of reference for how comfortable a train ride could be, this did not irritate them. By 8, the thing was in motion again, and none of those who knew better had fight left in them to protest their conditions. Berani settled down in one of the corners of the second-to-last car between Pahala and Samudra, and before long was asleep despite the jolting and clamor of the train, along with nearly all of the other Pajuang men of Tujuhdanau.